Welcome to Capitol Report, a weekly discussion with your elected officials on the issues and concerns that affect you.
Good evening, and thanks again for your time with us. Welcome to Capitol Report. Governor Rick Snyder this week gets the recommendation from the appeal of Detroit City Council before a final decision is made on the EFM potential there. We'll get a reaction to that and much more coming up tonight with my guest, Representative Phil Potvin, Republican from Cadillac, representing Michigan's 102nd House District, winning re-election to that seat in November. Representative, good to have you with us.
Golly, Dave, thanks so much. Pleasure to be here with you and also with all of our viewing audience. Wonderful.
Well, let's start with a possible statewide implication of that EFM decision for Detroit. For years, many colleagues like yourself that have been representing outstate areas have been somewhat objectionable to the continued financial resources going to Detroit, especially when revenue sharing has been cut in state budgets. I'm wondering what the reaction has been like in your district to this pending change for Detroit and what it might mean statewide, depending on where that decision finally comes down.
Well, the people that I have been talking to, Dave, are pleased about that decision. And they're pleased because it's time that someone stepped in to help Detroit out. You know, in 11, when I was a first-year representative, Dave Bing, the mayor, came in. And I was so pleased to meet Dave for the first time, shake his hand as he came into our caucus. But then he got down on both knees. And he said, gentlemen and ladies, I need some help. I need some financial dollars. I've got 48 unions that I have to deal with. I need your help financially. And you know what? We gave it to him. We gave him all the money he wanted, hundreds of millions of dollars from all of us in the state of Michigan. And he spent them. And when he came back last year in 12 and said, you know, I need that same amount of money again, we said, well, Mayor, what did you do with the last money we gave you? And he really couldn't tell us what he'd done with it. And based on that, we said, well, Mayor, there will be no more money. And that's when the mayor sat down finally with our governor, Rick Snyder, and said, okay, what do I have to do? And that's where the consent agreement came out and was signed last year. And now with things falling deeper and deeper into debt, and with them again turning down our opportunity for them at Belle Isle, where we would have taken that over, and they having no interest at all, we also have no interest in giving them any more money without them stepping forward to help themselves.
Well, a short time from when our conversation will wrap up here on this Monday afternoon will be the deadline for the appeals to come through. The hearing is expected earlier in the day for when people will catch up with this conversation. And I asked Senator John Mullinar this last week, and I want to ask you if there's direct ties from businesses in your district to those that deal directly with businesses in the city. We think traditionally of maybe small parts auto manufacturers that has had contracts with the big three in years past, but are there any direct ties that have been impacted as Detroit has gone through money shortages, perhaps checks not being written, and so to those people coming directly to you, representing them, having a direct reaction, a direct tie-in to what's been going on in Detroit, in Michigan's largest city, the city of Detroit?
Well, there really hasn't been, because the rubber companies, the Fiam Horn Company, also our foundry in Cadillac, all deal directly with businesses and not with the city. And because of that, those dollars have continued to flow very nicely, and real pleased. Also, some of them have sister companies in the Detroit area, not Detroit directly, but in surrounding communities. And again, they've all been working very well. It's been a very positive piece, especially for northern Michigan. Cadillac, we were so blessed because we did not lose a major industry as things went down in 06, 07, and 08. They continued to stay with us. Some employees were laid off, but they're all back to work in Cadillac. And real pleased to have almost 4,400 employees in our manufacturing pool right now.
Among the half-dozen ballot proposals that came before voters last November were those that would have altered the emergency financial manager laws. We know the result, all those ballot proposals went down to defeat. Are you satisfied as one of the state's lawmakers with what we have in place right now, especially as we're now looking at the potential of this being implemented for the city of Detroit, and then looking at as to wherever, I mean, should it ever come to a community or a school district, whatever the case may be, in a district like yours, is the framework of the law itself good and solid, or do we need to take a look at doing any more refining to that EFM law?
Well, at this point, I think it's fine, David, and the reason I think that is we've given people choices. We're not mandating at this point. We're not dictating that we're coming in, but instead, here are your choices, and you know what? We're here to help you because we're in this with you too. We basically are like a co-signer on a banknote, and if you go down, who picks it up? The co-signer. And that's us. That's all of us in the state of Michigan.
The governor has sent word to Washington, D.C., looking for federal disaster relief for Mecosta County, part of your district, District 102, after the flooding and damage earlier this year. Can you bring us up to date as to the extent of the damage, what is still in place now as we wait for ice jams to be cleared, properties that are still being impacted, and how that recovery is going right now?
Well, a couple of days after the initial damage and the initial ice flow started and people were evacuated, Senator Boer and I, who also represents the 35th District, which is part of my 102 and who I had followed in the 102nd House District, and I were given a personal tour by Sheriff Todd Purcell from Mecosta County of that damaged area, and it was horrific. It really was, and at the same time, what really came tough was that Consumers Power shut off the power down there the second day. And they shut it off as a safety issue because some wires had been exposed, water was on it, and it was literally electrifying small areas, and just totally unsafe. But when that happened, it also created more problems for the people who had their homes there, because now all of a sudden you've got everything frozen, and how are you going to clean up frozen water? You really physically can't do that. So the thing that I'm so pleased about is on the local level what happened. And what happened is that our local safety director got very involved and has helped out, moving people out, moving some of their possessions out, as well as our Red Cross in the Mecosta County area has helped out, and the Salvation Army. Everyone reaching out to find places for people to live, find some dollars for them, find food for them. So it really proves, Dave, that on a community level, especially rural Michigan, we do take care of our own. And as we reach out a little bit farther, what's happened is the governor has worked closely so that we will have some dollars available on low-cost loans for people who are going to want to be doing some rebuilding. But we're also working, too, to help people restructure what they want to rebuild and pick them up, because being on the floodplain itself is only going to mean disaster once again in our future. And that's the last thing we want to do. We don't want a Band-Aid here. We want a long-term fix for these people.
When you talk about the low-interest loan monies that will be available, is that through the appeal, or are you still waiting for final word as to whether or not that federal assistance will be a part of the recovery dollars that will be needed?
I think the federal assistance will be above and beyond. We've already got dollars arranged by the Agriculture Department to help us out there. And the other very important thing is James Turner, who grew up in the Big Rapids area. Well, really, he started in Cadillac because he was my neighbor in Cadillac. And then his father bought a pharmacy in Big Rapids. But James is the district director for the Department of Agriculture, the Federal Department of Agriculture. Very involved here, and he's very aware of it and really helping us out.
How common has an event like this been? Not asking you to put on necessarily the hat of a meteorologist, and then we obviously have had some very erratic swings in the weather. We got certainly much more snow than we received all of last season, but it still has been some rather odd swings. So is something like this, has it been common with the rivers and waterways through that area or other areas in your district in particular, where we've seen events like this in the past?
Not really. This is the first major hit, and part of this is because they took that dam out on the north side of Big Rapids. And when they did that, they allowed complete water flow. And in doing that, we've also had a lot of silt. We've had a lot of other sand and whatnot flow south, and it just happens that right at that floodplain area, that's where it's decided to build up and really create a monstrous sandbar that we really need to be looking at in the future. Is there some way that we can move some of that farther down or move it to the banks? What can we do here to improve that river flow so that it doesn't span but instead flows deeply?
So the decision to remove the dam was based on what? And is there now, I mean, is this those that may have been opposed to it, not necessarily saying we told you so, but I mean, was this something that was potentially seen as a risk or the downside of making that decision, and now needing to re-examine that and what can be done to bolster the supports in the future?
Well, I don't see them rebuilding that dam at all at this particular point, because you do have some other dams downstream on the Muskegon River, and very important that we maintain those. You know, in my mind, our cheapest electric power is hydropower, and hydropower is natural. These windmills that we put up all around, a great deal for the people renting the property, but if you're living close to those windmills, it can be a real health hazard, and we're finding out more and more about those health hazards as people live there a little bit longer. The other challenge, though, too, is the cost of wind power, and it's phenomenal compared to the hydro cost. I mean, we're talking 4 times the cost per kilowatt. And is that really what we want? People are sick and tired of paying a higher bill. We want to pay a lower bill. And in my mind, the only way to lower that bill is through hydro. And we need the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to start working with us, not against us. They're the ones who have created a major problem by saying, no, we're not going to allow hydro anymore. And the answer is, excuse me, hydro is the cheapest power. And here in Michigan, we all know the kind of waterways that we have here, and they all should be harnessed with free hydropower.
Well, we'll watch the progress then as that moves forward, especially with new administration there and involved with running EPA. Another issue that came from last week's conversation with Senator Mullinar had to do with proposed use of monies from the Natural Resources Trust Fund. His bill that he introduced was specifically dealing with using some of those monies, reallocating them to do some dredging on the waterways. You had also commented on that issue coming up too in the House. Where are those talks right now, and was there companion legislation that was tied directly to what he was introducing in the Senate as you, Senate and House, collectively look at this in Lansing?
Well, because I don't sit on that DNR committee, either appropriations or policy, I'm really not familiar with it. I have not seen anything yet. I've been involved in my own committees of agriculture, education, school aid, and also capital outlay. So on top of that with the appropriation. So I know we'll see it. I just haven't personally seen any of it yet.
Well, it is in the direction of agriculture that I wanted to go to. Members of the Michigan Farm Bureau, we've been in touch with through CMU Public Radio News, are in Washington this week for a legislative seminar. You're the chair of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Ag and Rural Development, and there were some hearings last month, the beginnings of working through the 2014 budget proposal. Where are those negotiations right now?
Well, our negotiations are in great shape. Our governor got the message. Ag is successful. We're producing, even though we had a tough year last year for our fruit farmers in particular. But on a whole, potatoes were up, corn was up, soybeans were up, our other beans were up. I was just on an ag tour a week ago Friday in the Thumb area, and the amount of beans that we have there is phenomenal, that we're providing the world with. As far as our own budget goes, we're in excellent shape. Talking with Senator Green, who heads up the Senate side of Agriculture and Rural Development Appropriations, we're right on board, and also dealing with our director, Jamie Clover Adams, who, gee, when she came to testify in my committee, Dave, it was wonderful to see her smiling through her entire testimony. And we're not talking big dollars here. You've got to remember that the ag budget is the smallest single budget in the state. Right now, we're at $76 million out of over $45 billion. Lots of zero difference there. And, you know, our governor has proposed that we move that up a little bit, and we're fine with that. Because the other thing that we're doing is that we're taking care of ourselves. We're taking care of ourselves with our dairy producers, as far as having our own inspectors now, who will be part of the agriculture department again. That's an add-on for us. The other add-on is in exports. When we talk about we're not going to be eating everything that we produce here in Michigan, let's export it. Let's get some dollars coming back. And that's really been working well for us. And part of the reason the governor was such a big push on the bridge down in the Detroit area in our future, so that when that happens, we'll be ready for it.
You brought up the damage that the fruit crops went through last year. How has that potentially been addressed in any way moving into the budget for this year? Were any extra provisions needed to be put in place? I mean, everyone knows that there is an inherent risk, and there are seasons for various crops, sometimes a whole series of crops like we saw last year. But how does this season look in comparison to what they went through last year?
Well, the season looks well because last year, thanks to Representative Ray Franz from the 101st, who dropped a bill to say we need to create a loan pool for these people, and a low-interest loan pool, and that's exactly what we did in a very hurried way last summer. And that got through the people that needed those dollars to pay their bills that go on even though they have no crop. That's all been taken care of. So with that, things are moving fairly well. And you know, the irony is we look at a year ago right now, Dave, here in Michigan, we were at 80 degrees. Things were unbelievable. People were playing golf. You know, now we're having rain and up in the 40s today and wondering exactly, are we going to have a repeat of last year? Gee, I sure hope not, because I'm a downhill skier. I like to spend time at Cabernet Peaks. And I'd like to think I've got a couple more weekends there.
Waiting to see if there's more left to the season.
Right.
Senator Debbie Stabenow wants a redo on the 2012 Farm Bill after changes were made to get it through amidst the fiscal cliff countdown. What do the agriculture interests in your district say about what came from that first version that passed in the Senate in Washington and any revised version that may be getting talked about now?
Well, they're looking forward to anything possible, Dave, that can be given from the feds. They're really looking at them and saying, why can't you follow Michigan? Michigan's done their job. Michigan has been responsible in a very responsible way. They get their budgets done in June, for heaven's sakes, and they're not due until October. And here you people are over 4 years into the program and you still don't have a budget? How on earth is the country running? And that's really more of what our farmers are saying.
How much of a connection is there, and this is something we've tried to look at before from that is federal policy, but as it is joined with or complements, supplants, whatever the case may be, and depending on the issue and or a series of issues from the federal farm bill to what policy is set through the Michigan Farm Bureau, through the budgets that then come through committees like yours, how do all those intersect? And when you have a piece like the federal farm bill still sitting out there in some ways unresolved, what is the impact, if any, to the work that you're doing?
Well, it's not very much because, again, our budget is so small that we basically are funding it ourselves. And that's wonderful. And we also are very conservative in how we're funding it. And being able to do it that way, we are being responsible. So the federal bills will help for sure. Are we dependent on them? No, not like you'd think we were.
Speaking of the seasonal change, we're laboring through a little bit of that here today.
You bet.
Pardon me. You've been appointed as well, along with Representative Joel Johnson, who was our guest a few weeks back, to Midwest Regional Panel that's looking at agricultural and natural resources issues. I believe you noted as we sat down that group has not yet had a first meeting, but what is your early sense as to some of the range of issues across some of the Midwestern states, also with friends and colleagues from into Canada? What sorts of issues will be worked on?
Well, I'm pleased that, to be appointed to that because our last Director of Agriculture, Keith Cray, is now the director for the Michigan DNR. And so Keith and I are very good friends. And being able to coordinate as he does, also with Jamie Clover Adams out of the Ag Department and with Dan Wyatt from the DEQ side, we've got a wonderful team put together here. And I think we're going to be leading the pack as we meet with our other Midwestern people to show them exactly how things, when you work together as a good team, can be positively going forward. And you look, too, at the amount of food that we create here in Michigan, and it's phenomenal. The exciting thing is we've seen real estate prices drop. The one piece of real estate that hasn't been dropping at all are ag lands, agricultural properties. And we're seeing a lot of those properties now throughout rural Michigan coming back and being purchased by people down south who are bringing bigger farms in. The exciting piece that I like, comparing Michigan to California, is that we still are the small family farms, where California is the monster farms. And they're in there totally for dollars, versus ourselves who are there for some pride too in what we grow and how well we grow it. And that's, I think, why we're shining in our state and why people want our produce versus somebody else's.
And a recent announcement out of your office dealt with grants that will be helping to make some fairground improvements in Wexford County,
Yes.
Part of your district. Last week, a member from the House proposed putting up most, if not all, of the state's assets for bid on naming rights, saying that it could raise a substantial amount of revenue for the state as we continue to look for ways to bring Michigan totally back. In your view, is an open bid process the right way to go, or should we be exploring more widespread auctioning off of state lands or other properties?
Well, an open bid process, the winner takes all on that, but also it would force people who don't have the dollars to be the winners to go together with others. And then the question comes back, well, if you've got 6 friends, who are you going to call it after? Or is it going to be 6 initials? What are we doing? And I think maybe we're going at it about the wrong way there. Even I'd much rather see us take a look and individually put pieces out instead of offering it to the highest.
Well, and those auctions do happen, at least in terms of the sale for or the auctioning off of state properties, not necessarily obviously the natural properties,
Right.
but other state-owned land that is then given over to private development. I'm gathering that what this lawmaker is looking at, though, obviously is to potentially have, if there were enough folks with enough money, that we would have all sorts of parks, bridges, you name it, anything that becomes, would all be open to potentially being named for someone. Do we have parcels of, areas of other state-owned entities that could be, under further review, put up for at least sale to take those off of the state's books and put those into developers' hands as opposed to auctioning off the naming rights per se?
Well, there are some pieces. The question comes back to what exactly do you want to have? A good example would be the state fairgrounds in Detroit, where we've had a few people stepping forward. The only problem is nobody has any money. And it's a very nice piece of property down there on 8 Mile. That could very well be renovated and put into a shopping center, put into lots of other things. And I've heard a couple of people mention shopping centers, but they're talking about a gift of the property instead of selling that property. And I'd much rather see it sold, as you point out, Dave, to the highest bidder in this point. And if you're the highest bidder, you can name it whatever you want to, because you then become the owner.
The House at the end of the last session increased the funding for local governments by increasing the payment in lieu of taxes, or the PILT payments that go to local governments and schools. How much in real money is that likely to mean for, we could take obviously an area, but with you as our guest, what could that potentially mean in terms of real dollars and cents in District 102?
In 102, in all 3 of my counties, Mecosta, Osceola, and Wexford, they will be receiving PILT dollars. They already are receiving them, and that's what's so exciting. Instead of the state holding on to it until the last minute or not paying it until late and receiving no late fees, they're now paying it up front. They're paying it in February. I know, talking to a couple of my clerks, they've already received their checks. And that's wonderful. And we're talking in excess of $100,000 in each of those 3 counties.
Does that stay in place then, that program moving forward? Was that as it was passed then, we keep that policy and procedure on the books moving forward?
It definitely does. And again, Senator Darwin Boer from the 35th Senate seat was the driver behind this. He and Senator Tom Casperson from the UP, both of them highly affected in their districts. So a wonderful piece. We got together. Matter of fact, the senator called me on Thanksgiving Day to say, hey, Phil, let me put you up on where we need to be here. and because our trade-off was to put in the Detroit Transit Authority to help Detroit out in that way. And by voting that through, we got the Detroit votes then for the PILT.
Well, we talked a lot about the agriculture issues. You mentioned that that budget is on track. We'll watch for the progress of that and all the rest of the budget negotiations and the other issues moving forward. But as always, we thank you for your time and sitting down to bring us up to date on what is happening. Thanks so much for being here.
Dave, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure, and thank my listening audience, viewing audience. A great opportunity because I do watch your station quite often.
Good to know, and thanks for your time and attention as well here on Capitol Report. Our guest has been Representative Phil Potvin, Republican from Cadillac, representing the 102nd House District. Remember, we are rebroadcast in the overnight, the Wednesday early morning lineup on CMU Public TV. Check your listings for that. These programs as well go to our website where they are loaded up for viewing anytime. Go to WCMU.org, click on TV, and then the direct link for Capitol Report. For all of us here and our technical crew, we thank them for their support as well. We'll talk again. Thanks for being with us.
You've been watching Capitol Report. Join us again as your elected officials speak to your concerns on current issues.